right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Lunch and Learn today. We are focusing in on active learning. This is part one of a three-part series. If you're not able to make all three, it's okay. It's just letting you know that for 3 Lunch and Learns in a row, we're going to really be exploring active learning, really being able to get into this topic. And I am Laura Thompson. I'm an instructional designer at Stanton. However, I am mobile, so sometimes I'm in different places. We were all down at Georgetown, for instance, on Monday, so we do go different places. If you need us, or we're always available virtually if you need us that way as well. So please reach out for help. And I have my effervescent partner here.
Hi, I'm Jenna Cinnamon. I'm also an instructional designer. I get to work with Laura out of Stanton. But like she said, sometimes you'll find us at different places. Tomorrow I'm down at Terry. But by all means, please feel free to ping us on Teams, submit a ticket, shoot us an email. And we're really excited that you joined us today. I know that kind of that back to the basics of like the good teaching and the good strategies is really important, not only for us, but also for our students. So we're excited to dive into part one of our active learning. So by the end of today's session, our main goal for you is to be able to walk away with a working definition of active learning. We want to kind of explore different active learning examples that hopefully will inspire you. Laura has also put together this amazing continuum to show you how simple or complex active learning strategies can be. We want you to be able to discover some strategies that require minimal effort, and then also some that maybe require a little more work on your part, but they can be really rewarding and honestly something that you could scale as you go through the different semesters.
Jenna, I just realized I think the woman in the picture and me, we're sharing the same sweater today. Look at this. I just noticed that.
Oh my God, that's too fun.
That wasn't even planned.
I love the cozy weather style, that's for sure. Now, before we get started, we always love to have a little engagement strategy with you, just to kind of see where you're at. So we would love for you to share a highlight from your January. This could be personal, professional, or both. We know life honestly never slows down. So sometimes it's really important to find intentional ways to reflect and celebrate. And I know that's something Laura and I like to do as well. And we were just chatting about that yesterday. So if you could, please head to our Slido. You could do that either by scanning the QR code. I just dropped the link in the chat. Or if it's easy for you, you can go to slido.com and enter in our session. Oh, and Jill, it's no problem that you're off camera. We understand completely. I just relocated myself. So we're all doing what we can. Ooh, and I'm going to change my screen share for a second so we can kind of see everyone's responses as they come in. So we started a new year. Very true. It was a long month. I joined an amazing team. All right, now I'm really nosy. Does someone want to claim that? What team did you join? Was it new here at Delaware Tech?
Oh, it was with you guys.
Let's see. Oh, good to have you. We actually have several folks from CCIT on here as well. And yeah, Allie's one of our newest instructional designers. Started my practice with cooperative-based agency. Ooh, this is fun. Let's see. Going to the beach to walk my dog. All right, so I'm assuming that's someone who maybe lives in Sussex because I think it's harder to find a beach up north here. Any other ones? Fixed my back. Have an amazing
I don't know who that is.
Sarah in here.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Love teaching on campus this semester. Had a birthday last week. Happy belated birthday. I feel like I keep turning 24 over and over myself. Started going to the gym. Oh, Laura is a very avid gym goer herself. I'm envious of her routine, to be honest with you. And having good times with my family. I love this. Laura, do you want to share out what your highlight from January was?
Yes. I finished 3,100 push-ups, 100 push-ups a day, every day in January to support St. Jude's.
I love it. Now we're gonna have to see the progress picture from the shoulders. Uh,
Oh, sure.
If someone else started physical therapy for some nagging physical issues, yes, taking care of ourselves is really important. My highlight, I decided to go back to school, so I'm back in college myself to try to get hopefully my last degree. Awesome. This was great. All right, I'm gonna bounce back over. All right. Thank you guys for sharing out this morning with us.
So now we'll go ahead and get into this session about active learning. And this definition comes from the Yale Poorvu Center for Teaching and Learning. But it's really talking about how active learning is anything that gets students involved in doing and thinking about things that they're doing. And then to reiterate that for the next slide, we're talking about these two areas. When students are actively learning, they're doing things. We often think about doing things, getting them up, getting them moving, having them work in groups, things like that. But it can also involve thinking about things that are being done. That's that metacognition, thinking about thinking. So it really doesn't always have to be. Sometimes we feel trapped and think, oh, if it's active learning, we have to get them up, running around, building things, or, crossing the line like we talked about before, or being able to just be active. But it's also recognizing that if we give them those brain breaks to help kind of process what has been said for about 15 minutes or so, then that's also a part of active learning. And it doesn't involve all of that movement, all of that craziness that might feel disruptive. We can mix the two very well and be able to still feel like we've got our course moving forward. And that's why our point today is active learning strategies that are not big modifications to what you're doing in your course already. And just to kind of back this up a little bit more, I love to talk about the research. There is research out there that supports that active learning contributes to inclusive classrooms. Our last 3 sessions of Lunch and Learn this semester will be about inclusive classrooms. Research has also shown that these active learning strategies support underrepresented or first generation students who are in your classroom as well. And active learning can build that higher order thinking skills. Sometimes we call those HOTS, right? And then we have active learning can contribute to that classroom community development. If you were able to attend our first 2 Lunch and Learns or watch those videos, you saw that we talked a lot about classroom community development so that it can help with classroom management and be really proactive for what we're doing. So let's make some connections here. Think back to past activities that you've had in your own courses. We've talked a little bit about the definition, the research that supports it. So you probably have a good idea of what active learning is now. And maybe you've done some things and never even thought that they were active learning. Go ahead and type into the chat. Feel free to go ahead and share it in that chat. What are some active learning strategies that you've used in the past already? Because I know we have a gold mine here. I see escape rooms. Escape rooms are often digital. They can be physical also. They can be, I've used them in physical ways with envelopes. You can have them all the way with locks, things like that. But it's really puzzles that students solve in the process of learning things to be able to escape an area. I see surveys on Zoom, being able to let students interact there when you're on those Zoom classes. And that's an excellent point, Jen. We're talking about across modalities here today. We're not just talking about the in-person. We're not just talking about the Zoom or the asynchronous. We're trying to talk about how does it look in each place. So thank you for pointing that out. We have collaborative Google Docs so students can analyze text. Excellent. Jack, what is this?
So it's a survival exercise where they are involved in a plane crash, and there are 12 items that they found, and they have to prioritize which items and explain why they would use them and things like that. So just to kind of emphasize like diversity of thought, teamwork, things like that.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And I also see from Megan that she's had students work through puzzles and determine possible answers or approaches. These are really great ideas that help the students get more active. Oh, and case studies. Yeah, case studies are a great example. And I love, you said you put humor into them as well, or popular culture.
Yeah, so like for example, recently I was teaching a course on social or teaching a lecture on socialization, and in order to sort of impress that idea upon the students, I brought in fictional psychological profiles on various fictional characters and asked them to see if they could, suss out how they had been socialized or what the major socializing influences on them were. So I'm bringing like Darth Vader and T'Challa from Black Panther and stuff like that.
And that can be a lot of fun because you're trying to take some of those popular characters that people might know and having them analyze them in a different way. Very fun. And even looking at having students teach each other, at least having students be able to teach each other, really engage in that. There's often, what's that old saying, that if you teach it, you're going to remember 90+% of it. What do you notice? What do you wonder for classes? Often relating to a graph. So helping them with graph interpretation, but through really thinking about it. This is great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your ideas.
I know I got some new ideas myself. I think that's incredible to give them that chance in a lot of different formats, especially teaching each other different case studies. Those were awesome. Cool. So we're going to take a look at several different activities that you can implement. We know that there's a lot we're going to show today, and we will also have a resource at the end that explores all of these and more a little closer for you. The first two activities we want to explore are classification pauses and collaborative note-taking. These can overlap, but we like to look at them as separate buckets as well. With clarification pauses, it's when the instructor intentionally pauses during the lecture and asks students to take a few minutes to summarize in writing or orally what they have just learned. This is a really great way for students to reflect and also get clarification if they need it. Sometimes if we continue throughout a whole course, a class that, our students don't have that time to digest in small chunks. So one of the great active learning strategies is to pause. I know I need that myself sometimes, and it really helps our students and an opportunity to ask questions and get clarity. As for collaborative note-taking, it can be used in conjunction with clarification pauses, or it can be used as a standalone activity. It's when students may exchange their notes with a partner so that they can compare ideas and sometimes catch things that they missed or maybe misunderstood. This is a great way, part of that, classroom community that we're hoping we develop, that students can trust each other and their instructor to share openly and get that feedback that will help them and honestly help others too. Two more strategies are the 1-minute pages and the think, pair, share. 1-minute pages is honestly a really great way to start or even end your class. It's when students get a minute to write down major points that they can remember from the previous class, if you want it to be your activating strategy. You ask them to, explain what they remembered and any questions that they've developed since the last time you've seen them. And similarly, at the end of class, it can be your summarizing strategy, where students can write down key takeaways and maybe predict or consider logical next steps for the upcoming class. And as the instructor, you might review these classes or these responses in class so that you can answer questions and maybe look for trends amongst your students. I think pair, share is probably something very familiar to many of you, but this is honestly a tried and true strategy, and it's always important for us to mention. Think, pair, share is when students get to work independently first, and then share out their thoughts with a neighbor. It's a great way to compare their responses with another partner and synthesize in a joint effort. Sometimes with Think, Pair, Share, students could be thinking about the same topic or maybe even different topics. So when they pair together, they can collaborate and see how things overlap. Think, Bear, Share can be done in all modalities, to be honest with you. I had an awesome opportunity to sit in on a high flex class last week, and they were doing a Think, Pair, Share activity in breakout rooms for the synchronous learners. So it's fun to kind of see how you can use these in all formats. I can think of the 1-minute pages being used on a Google Doc, or honestly, a true paper if it's in person. So that's something that you can pivot based on the modality. And 2 more. Demonstrations are something that can take place in your course, and it could even be digitally. Students can first predict the outcome of an upcoming demonstration, and then afterwards, they can discuss what they observed. They can see how their predictions maybe differed than the actual results, and it gives the instructor time at the end to make those connections and maybe see, oh, why did it go differently than you anticipated? Let me explain why this happened and provide some clarity to you. And something that we've already done ourselves today is using polls. Slido is one of my personal favorites, or any audience response system, to be honest. So instructors can pose questions to students. This can be done to solve problems individually or in small groups. They can do it digitally, just like we did, or you can even poll a group in person too. There's lots of great resources now in all of these platforms, so you can display the results to your students. So sometimes that's really nice when it creates a word cloud and they can see common themes, or just see all the anonymous responses of their classmates. It could be used to solve actual problems that have an answer, maybe a math problem or a science problem, to kind of see any trends or maybe misconceptions of, most of my students didn't get this question correct. Maybe I need to go back and revisit that topic. So I'm going to pause myself, just like we hope you do in your classrooms. So we've started by looking at 6 different active learning strategies. And I would love for you to finish the sentence either in the chat or feel free to come off mute. But I'm going to try. Which of these 6 would you feel comfortable trying? Slido? Yes, Jim. We love Slido. I'm not going to lie. 1-minute pages. That's awesome. Do you, polls? Polls, clarification pauses, collaborative note-taking. Now, as you're kind of thinking about these, is there a lesson in particular that you can already kind of see where one of these fit? Thinking 1-minute paper, clarification pause. Yeah, I'm right there with you, especially on the clarification pause. I know when I was teaching, that's something that I needed to do more of. I'm not too proud to admit that. Also loving the 1-minute pages. Yes, I've honestly used 1-minute pages as like a summarizing strategy at the end, but I love to think of it in the beginning of the class to kind of get that prior knowledge going for our students. Awesome.
And I think also Megan's point there too, of being able to use it during those clarification pauses throughout the course, there is a possibility, because it's brief, it doesn't take a lot of time from what you're doing, but it gives the students that much needed time to process all this information they've been getting. Lately, I've been using the phrase a lot, drinking from a fire hose, right? And if it's all this brand new information, we have to give them moments to process what we've just been talking about. And these 1-minute pages, sometimes there's research that shows that actually, if they are in front of you and they have paper, or even if they're online, you just give them a minute. You don't have to see them all, but as an instructor, you can see them to then collect them, to look at misconceptions, things like that. But you can just give them that time. And there's something to be said for that kinesthetic that you get from actually writing pencil on paper or pen on paper. So for some people, that really helps them process what they're doing. It's very interesting stuff.
I know. And I even think about collaborative note-taking in the math classroom. I would use that as almost like when they would solve problems. Maybe not always necessarily like error analysis, but they solve a problem each and then compare and kind of look over what each other did to see, oh, I really like how you showed your work on that, or wow, I didn't remember to do that step and I need to go back. Joseph, I'll often end a partial lecture on particular subject with a short worksheet. Yes, that I love that. Making those connections, right? We talked about concept maps and mind mapping before in earlier lunch and learns, and having that time to make all those connections between what we've discussed and maybe in contextualized situations. I love that. It makes it way more meaningful for our students. Awesome. All right, Lara, I'm going to hand over the next chunk to you.
Woohoo! All right. It's very interesting that we did talk about error identification because that's in this next section here as well. For the error identification, we often will use that again in something like math, but you can also envision that in an English classroom where you have maybe a paragraph that's presented. Now we're looking for the errors in there, and not just spelling errors, not just the mechanical things, because we have spell check now, things like that, but maybe the errors in the semantics or the syntax of the language, so that we're beginning to learn how to represent ourselves clearly and for a reader, for someone who's consuming it. And we can use this for proofs and math, of course, as we mentioned, or any other materials, maybe a lab process sheet that we want them to be able to analyze it to make sure that they're not going to blow everything up. Things like that. That might be a good thing to do. And then I'll go over to the other one, the sequence reconstruction. These are for anything that you have that might be kind of in a flowchart presentation or in a sequence. So we just talked about those lab process sheets. Maybe we have all those steps presented to the students, and as an active learning opportunity, we actually let them cut them and move them around on the desk to put them together. As an instructor, you can cut them first, so you have this step, this step, this step. They have to put them in order, or you can allow them to kind of tear them or cut them, whatever you can do with that. You decide how much prep time you really need for something like that. This isn't supposed to be a huge amount of extra work, but it's supposed to be a great way to help your students process things. We have activities. We have another set of them that's on the next slide that's about self-assessment. This is when you let your students actually think about what are the learning objectives in the course and how close am I to mastering them? How close am I to understanding what these are? And a self-assessment gives students the opportunity to participate in really looking at their own understanding. Again, this can be collected, it might not be collected. You can do this in D2L for any of your courses, any of your modality of courses, through surveys that can be anonymous. They're not graded, nothing's collected, but it's just giving your students the opportunity to look through them. Or you can get the results so that you can recognize if there are recurring misconceptions in your course, and you can address those, which can be really helpful. Then this one takes a little bit more time for the students, but it's student-made questions. And this might be another a really good way during those little breaks, they create a question that could address the topic that they've just talked about for 15 minutes, or as a summary for what they've talked about all day, or at the end of that unit. For these student-made questions, you can even go so far as to give them a copy of Bloom's taxonomy. If you're not familiar with Bloom's, that's that higher order thinking. That means that we have some questions that are simply recall questions, that we just kind of have to remember some information. But then we might have some questions where we have to synthesize 2 or 3 different bits of information and actually create something new. So it's a whole continuum of how we might address demonstrating our knowledge about a topic. So you decide how much that needs to go into what you're doing with your students, but the possibilities are amazing, right? I mean, we can really see what we could do with this. These are entry tickets and exit tickets. Sometimes we talk about these together, but I did separate them on purpose because I do think we think about them in very different ways. The entry ticket, Jenna was talking about, one example could be that 1-minute page. When they enter into the classroom, you have them talk about what they remembered from the last class. You could also have them talk about what they remembered from the readings that they were supposed to have done coming in. So one of the reasons that you might try that, I wouldn't belabor it necessarily, but provide it every once in a while so that students recognize how important it is to read outside of course, outside the class, because they're going to maybe be called upon to address it through an entry ticket. You as the instructor can then collect it and again, address misconceptions, things like that. But you also have the example of exit tickets. Jenna pointed out how sometimes a single tool can work in both places. So the 1 minute page can also be an exit ticket. We have several ideas too. For instance, I really like, there's a 3-2-1, and I've used that in several iterations, right? So you can say three good points that I learned. You can say 2 things that I already knew, and then 1 question I still have, for instance. You decide how it can be tailored to your particular topics, but there's lots of ways that if you collect those exit tickets, you can review them, address misconceptions for the next course, or in the D2L world in between, if it's egregious enough. And then you can also, for those exit tickets, maybe even throw in a little think, pair, share. So they've completed the exit ticket. Now they talk about it. That's how they're processing it. You don't really have to collect that. You're walking around, kind of getting the general feel of the class. So you can also again decide and mix it up a little bit. I wouldn't do exit tickets every class, for instance. Then it gets boring. It's not active anymore. It's just a checklist thing. It's just a checkbox. But it's one way to be able to help make things more active for your students.
Now, these next 2, Laura and I had a really good conversation about these yesterday. So Laura, I'm definitely going to have you chime in too. With the empty outline, I personally think it's something that's often underutilized. Instructors can provide students with an empty piece of paper or maybe something that's partially completed. Think of it like a skeleton note or guided notes. And you give students the time to fill in the blanks. And it's really incredible to see how a student digests your lesson and how they organize it. Joseph, it kind of reminds me of something that you had shared earlier about making those connections. And this is something that can be done with minimal effort. You don't have to spend lots of time making this beautiful outline for every lesson. Maybe you have a couple canned templates, or you just have a stack of paper that you bring to class with you. And I think just being more strategic about where can I do this active learning strategy could provide great benefit for a lot of us as faculty. Laura, what were your thoughts on empty outlines?
Well, and some of the thoughts too are being able to kind of scaffold the learning a little bit for your students. This helps with some of those accommodations if you're thinking about how do I make my course more accessible to students as well. And they can be paper, as Jenna was saying, or it can be a digital representation, of course. But it's a basic outline of what you're intending to talk about that day. Sometimes you might have your point 1, right? Because we're thinking outlines, and then you might have 3 lines underneath of it to help trigger students that there are 3 important things here that I'm going to want you to pay attention to. And then if you know you're using this, and one of the things is sometimes our students come to us and they don't know how to organize their learning. So the first couple of lectures that we do, it might be really helpful for them to provide something like this, just to help them think about their organization. You don't have to do it for every lecture, but it's a great way to help them kind of recognize how do I parse out an important point? What do I do with this information? And then you can have strategic points where you stop and say, okay, I just shared with you 3 great ideas. You probably want to write those down. Or I like to prime students too. I'm going to tell you 3 great ideas now. You're going to want to write them down. So sometimes it's important to prime them as well. And then of course you can pair that with that think, pair, share, or with the 1 minute write. Maybe it's a 1 minute outline fill in, something like that. But it's being able to be kind of flexible in your approach. But this helps provide that guidance for them. Jenna, did you want to talk about PMI?
Yeah. And Laura, you used one of my favorite words that I think we all need to talk more about is just that scaffolding. Scaffolding doesn't mean that you're doing the work for them. It means you're helping provide structure and, scaffolding and giving accommodations, they can overlap or they don't have to. We can give scaffolding to all of our students. And even as adults, they need it. I know I need it. Laura and I make outlines for this. Well, I should say mostly Laura, and it's nice to have that structure to give us a guide of where we're going to go. Thank you for that, Laura. And PMI, it's not talking about mortgages here, but with PMI, it's kind of 3 columns: pluses, minuses, and interesting points. It's maybe like almost a KWL kind of mentality, what you know, what you want to know, what you learned kind of thing. And students can use this table structure to critique a particular topic, concept, or idea. So in the pluses, they'll maybe say some highlights of it, some things that they find are great. The minuses are maybe what are some of the flaws or what are some things that went wrong? And then interesting points. Those are those maybe questions they have or something that they didn't think about until they had that intentional time to sit down and digest. Providing this structure and organization can use a lot of the other active learning strategies, like Laura said. So it's really nice to see how things can be intertwined together and where they can fit in your lesson.
What I love
All right.
about this too is it's not added work for you necessarily. You don't have to create this graphic organizer and print it and make sure that you bring it to class, or even design one online. You can talk to your students about if they want a physical paper. They can take any kind of scrap that they have and fold it into thirds, which actually is a task in itself, to tell you the truth, for some people. But we can have. I know for me, I'm like, it's not quite even. So but I'm learning to live with that. Yes, hamburger and hot dog style. I love the folds. I love the folds. But so we can do it in thirds, and then they can just use those natural columns. If they have a Google Doc, they can create it into a table and write it into those 3 columns. The columns really is just for organizing their thinking. It's helping them process what's going on here. And it's a really great way for them to analyze what they know, what they don't know, and what they thought was actually something interesting that they want to hang on to. We're going to talk about what are your top 3. So this takes some evaluation on your part. This is a higher order thinking skill. We have A through N, dun, dun, dun. So there's a lot to think about, but we just helped you see 14 different strategies today. Woo! And what we'd like you to do is decide your top 3. And you can always present those, in your order of your top 3 or just the top 3. We won't push it too hard, today. But please go ahead, type in the chat or feel free to unmute. What are the top 3 that you think would be most useful for you, for your courses, for your students? ACF, clarification pauses, 1-minute pages, and polls. A lot of people, we have a couple of people who like A the best. Then we have a G, empty outlines. Nice. Jenna's taking on the empty outlines there in her thoughts. Excellent. BGL, collaborative note-taking. Oh, really getting those students to be able to work together. Jennifer, I see that is a great idea that you would like to try. Empty outlines and student-made questions. Excellent. I love it that Allie put in one that looks like a word, GAF. So it's a GAF. Probably in that order then, right? Empty outline, clarification pauses, and polls. I'm gonna have to analyze these letters, see which one got the most votes. It looks like A to me on a quick look got the most votes. Those just being able to stop for a minute and letting students process it. Actually, I see an N, an M too, and then I see an N. Excellent. L's the runner up. I love it, Megan. She's like, I couldn't just say these. So L's also in there. I love that, to be able to help get them thinking.
And, Laura, I think Megan made a really good point that these aren't things that you may use every single class period. Are you going to use a strategy? Absolutely. But there's some you might use more often than others. And it's still nice just to know what's out there. And it kind of builds onto your active learning continuum. Laura, I'm going to go to that one. Okay.
Well, wait, hold on one second before you go, because you just inspired me. You and Megan just inspired me, because I want to make sure that I say this too. You're talking about, yes, you won't use you won't use like clarification pauses for every single thing that you do in your course. It gets boring for you, for the students. It doesn't feel as active anymore. It's not really as engaging because now it's something that we just keep doing, right? We mentioned that before. But you also don't have to use all 14 of these like all the time either. So the idea is we want to find that sweet balance between using strategies that work and having to constantly teach students how to use a brand new strategy. So for instance, we might like clarification pauses for 4 of our lectures during the duration of a course. And then we might like to use collaborative note-taking during 2 of those 2 different lectures, something like that. Or maybe we know we want to use 1-minute pages as entry tickets for 3 sessions. So it's just recognizing that, okay, I've got my top 3, my A, B, and C, and C overlapped with M, but I'm going to use those 3 kind of interchangeably throughout this course. The point is we really want to have that active learning. We want to have some novelty in it because that's what keeps us engaged and interested. But if we're changing it all the time, every single day, then it becomes kind of that task of always teaching something new also, and that cognitive load is greater on your students. They're less able to just process what you want them to do with the content, and they're constantly learning that new activity. So it's finding that sweet spot. I mean, that is really up to you, your cohort of students. You might find a cohort that can take 6 strategies and do those interchangeably, but maybe this one's only can do 4 because they didn't come with as much background knowledge to my class as this other group did. So I need to balance these out. But the whole point is that you're trying to make sure that they have those breaks to process the information that you're giving them in an active way, whether they're doing things or they're thinking about things that are being done. That's a great thing. Thank you for inspiring me, Jenna and Megan, for that, because I think that's so important. Daniel did ask, is PMI referring to scaffolding specifically? No, it's a piece of it. It could be seen as scaffolding. It is a way to help your students kind of process what they're learning. So it can be seen as a scaffold, but it's not the only example of scaffolding. If you want to talk about more of those examples, Daniel, reach out to Jenna or to myself, and we can definitely explore those more. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And he also said for 7 pairs of activities, are they correlated with each other or just here for the presentation? As we saw, some of them could overlap, like your 1-minute pages could be an entry ticket, right? So sometimes you'll see some overlap, Daniel, but sometimes they're standalone as well. And they weren't presented to be correlated. If that last screen made it kind of seem like it, that wasn't the intention. It was just a nice way to be able to list them so you didn't have to remember 14 of them out of your brain and what they were called. So we were just trying to present them there in a visual sort of way. All right, so this is the continuum. This is inspired from the University of Michigan, from their CRLT department. They had created a continuum, and the link to their continuum is provided in the resource document that we're going to share right after this. But it gives you some examples. So you'll see that these are from simple at the bottom to more complex at the top. So these are the kind of that active learning continuum. You'll see that a lot of the things that we talked about today are more towards that simple side because that's what we promised you. When you came here, we described it as these are kind of going to be the easier things to do. But I wanted to be able to have this screen for you just to show you where you can go if it fits with your class, if it fits with your cohort, if it fits with your topic. So we have those 1-minute papers, those self-assessments, triad groups, those are just groups of 3. So it's a little more complicated than a group of 2 because you probably want to make sure you give them jobs so they know what to do. Pairs usually can figure it out a little bit better on themselves, but if you do a triad, and quite often research shows if it's much bigger than a triad, you're going to have someone who sits there and does nothing. So if you're going to have a group of 4, and I wouldn't advise any bigger than that, make sure you have specific jobs for them all to do. Or else you will have one person who just sits there, whether they don't want to participate or whether they just feel like they can't contribute. There's 2 different ways that can happen because maybe those other people are louder, stronger, things like that. We saw case studies as an example. So Joseph, gold star, you've got a rating on there. It depends on how much you develop those. That's why they're kind of in the middle. Being able to use some of those tech tools can kind of be in the middle. By the time you're moving into games and simulations, those are things that would be a little bit more involved, right? Or a field trip, going somewhere. Even those virtual field trips can be pretty involved, because we need to think about how we're going to talk to students or lead them through it. So I wanted to just give you this as kind of a teaser. So here's some real easy things you can do as they make sense. There are some more complex things, and you can always reach out to Jenna or myself if you want to explore these further, or actually anybody on the CCIT team is able to help you explore these further.
And Laura, can I add that, something I wish I would have learned way earlier in my teaching degree was, you don't have to do all of it the first semester. You don't have to recreate every wheel. But if you can just commit to 1 or 2 class sessions each semester that you're trying to strategically see where active learning strategies could fit, or maybe that's when you spend that semester really making one complex active learning activity for your students, and then you can reuse it in future ones. So we know that it can be a little bit of an extra workload for some of these, but putting in that work up front really can save you a lot of time down the future, and obviously help our students be more successful in all of our classes. I loved this continuum, Laura, because I picture it as these are ones in the simple that I can do right now without a lot of extra effort. And maybe I'm going to pick one each semester from here on out from that more complex side that I can build and develop and have ready to use in the future. I love this.
So thank you so much for coming to Lunch and Learn today, and for actively participating in this active learning session. It's great.